Welcome to Whispers After Midnight.
Tonight, we delve deep into one of the darkest chapters of Louisiana's history, the chilling tale of the merciless slave sisters who destroyed 4 families and erased their lineages. Louisiana in 1841 was a place of stark contrasts, a land of wealth and culture on the surface, but underneath a society fueled by oppression and fear. The state's economy relied heavily on large plantations, where enslaved people labored under brutal conditions to sustain the booming sugar and cotton industries. Life for the enslaved was harsh. Families were often separated, punishments were severe, and hope for freedom was a distant dream. But the terror wasn't confined to the plantations. The social hierarchy created an atmosphere of tension and distrust. Free people of color lived in precarious positions, while white families, particularly those with wealth and influence, wielded enormous power. Within this volatile mix, fear spread quickly, not only from the threat of slave uprisings, but also from those who exploited the system for their own gain. It was in this turbulent environment that the infamous sisters emerged. Louisiana's swampy backroads, remote plantations, and insular communities made it easy for secrets to fester. Rumors of violence could travel quietly, and by the time authorities or neighbors became aware of the horrors, it was often too late. The sisters' acts of merciless cruelty didn't happen in isolation. They were facilitated by a society that turned a blind eye to the suffering of the enslaved and allowed unchecked power to fester. In essence, Louisiana in 1841 was the perfect storm of greed, fear, and injustice, a place where the merciless actions of 2 sisters could ripple outward, leaving 4 families utterly destroyed, their legacies erased, and their communities haunted for generations. This was not just a backdrop. It was a society that unknowingly nurtured the rise of one of its darkest legends. The 2 sisters at the center of this horrifying saga are shrouded in mystery even to this day. Historical records give us only fragments of their lives, but the pieces we do have paint a chilling portrait of cunning, cruelty, and a cold, calculated intelligence that left a trail of destruction in its wake. Born into an obscure family on the outskirts of a Louisiana plantation, the sisters were said to possess strikingly sharp features and an unsettling presence that made them both memorable and feared. Locals whispered that even as children, there was something different about them, a darkness behind their eyes that made people uneasy. By 1841, the sisters had already begun to cultivate a reputation that crossed the boundaries of social class. They were not ordinary slaves, nor merely rebellious. Their actions suggested a strategic mind, someone capable of manipulating both enslaved and free populations alike. They exploited the weaknesses and secrets of those around them, sowing distrust and fear, and often turning allies into instruments of their schemes. Even fellow slaves reportedly avoided direct interaction, fearing that the sisters' influence could drag them into calamity. Their motivations remain a mystery. Some historians speculate that the sisters were driven by revenge, a personal vendetta against specific families, perhaps tied to long-standing disputes or perceived injustices. Others argue that their cruelty was instinctual, an expression of a sociopathy sharpened by a harsh, unforgiving environment. Whatever the cause, what is undeniable is the precision with which they operated. Each act of malice seemed carefully planned, designed not merely to harm, but to annihilate reputations, fortunes, and family lines entirely. The sisters' background, cloaked in secrecy and fragmented accounts, adds an eerie layer to their legend. Even neighbors who survived encounters with them admitted to feeling watched, as if these 2 women were always several steps ahead, orchestrating chaos from the shadows. Their ability to move unnoticed through communities, yet leave devastation in their wake, would eventually cement them in history as figures of terror, the Merciless sisters whose names became synonymous with fear in 19th century Louisiana. The first family to fall victim to the sisters' merciless plan was the Beaumonts, a well-established plantation family known for their wealth and influence in southern Louisiana. On the surface, they seemed untouchable, respected by neighbors, and feared by some for their strict control over their enslaved workers. But the sisters saw not strength, but vulnerability. They recognized that the Beaumonts' pride and reliance on appearances could be weaponized against them. The sisters' approach was subtle at first. They ingratiated themselves with members of the household and even earned the trust of the younger children, who saw them as curious and intelligent companions. But behind the smiles and helpful gestures, the sisters were already setting their trap. They began sowing discord within the household, whispering lies and exaggerating slights, turning siblings and even staff members against each other. Their manipulations were almost invisible, so carefully executed that the Beaumonts never realized how quickly trust had eroded. Once tension had begun to fracture the family internally, the sisters escalated to more direct acts of sabotage. Crops mysteriously failed, livestock fell ill, and finances seemed to spiral out of control. Rumors spread that the sisters had cursed the family, whispers that were difficult to trace back but devastating in effect. The household grew increasingly paranoid, blaming neighbors and staff for their misfortunes, unaware that the true source of the chaos was the sisters quietly orchestrating from the shadows. By the time the final blow came, the Beaumonts were already weakened, both emotionally and socially. Some family members mysteriously disappeared, while others faced scandal or ruin that destroyed marriages and alliances. Within months, the family's reputation, carefully built over decades, lay in tatters. The sisters' method was not brute force but psychological warfare, exploiting fear, greed, and pride to ensure that the Beaumont name would no longer command the respect it once did. The destruction of the Beaumont family set terrifying precedent. Word of their downfall spread quietly through the plantations and settlements of Louisiana, leaving a trail of unease in its wake. It became clear to all who encountered the sisters they were not ordinary criminals. They were predators, calculating and merciless, and the path they walked left nothing but ruin behind. After the devastating fall of the Beaumont family, the sisters' reputation as agents of destruction began to quietly ripple through the plantations and towns of southern Louisiana. Their next target was the Duval family, a prominent household known for their extensive sugar fields and strict, authoritarian control over their enslaved workers. Unlike the Beaumonts, the Duvals were outwardly cautious, having heard whispers of the sisters' manipulations. But even their vigilance would prove insufficient. The sisters approached the Duvals under the guise of distant relatives or skilled household aides, embedding themselves seamlessly into the family's routines. Once again, their strategy relied less on overt violence and more on precision psychological manipulation. They observed every weakness, every unspoken tension, and every secret fear. Within weeks, subtle cracks appeared. A valued overseer accused another of theft, siblings quarreled over inheritance rumors, and trusted servants began questioning their loyalty. The sisters, always unseen in the center of the storm, were pulling these strings with unnerving ease. But the Duval family's tragedy did not stop at discord. The sisters' influence soon touched the very heart of the family's wealth. Crops failed inexplicably, livestock fell ill, and shipments bound for New Orleans vanished or rotted in transit. Rumors of curses began circulating. Neighbors whispered that the sisters had brought bad luck, or worse, that their presence carried a dark, supernatural force. Fear permeated the household. In private, family members began turning on one another, convinced that betrayal lurked within every corner. By the time the sisters moved on, the Duvals were left in disarray. Relationships were broken, debts had mounted, and the once proud family found themselves socially isolated. Their influence and status, built over generations, had been effectively dismantled without a single violent confrontation. Unlike the Beaumonts, the Duvals' downfall was noted by the surrounding community as a warning. These sisters were unstoppable, and their methods were insidious. The second tragedy marked a turning point in the sisters' reign of terror. They had demonstrated that destruction did not require weapons or open conflict. A combination of cunning, manipulation, and exploitation of human weakness was enough to obliterate even the most powerful families. By now, whispers of their actions traveled faster than their bodies ever could, spreading fear that would follow them like a shadow across Louisiana. By the time the sisters set their sights on the third family, the Lemoine household, their methods had grown bolder, sharper, and even more terrifying. The Lemoine family was known for their wealth in the sugar trade, but also for their strict, often cruel management of their enslaved workers. Unlike previous victims, the Lemoines were cautious and suspicious by nature, making them a more challenging target. Yet the sisters thrived on challenge, feeding off the thrill of manipulating those who considered themselves untouchable. Their strategy with the Lemoines combined everything they had perfected: psychological warfare, subtle sabotage, and a carefully cultivated aura of fear. They infiltrated the household as distant relations and skilled aides, their demeanor unassuming yet deliberate. Almost immediately, they began exploiting latent tensions within the family. Old grudges between siblings were rekindled, minor disagreements were magnified, and every misfortune, from a sickly horse to a missed shipment, was whispered as a sign of betrayal or a curse. But with the Lemoines, the sisters took cruelty to a new level. They began isolating family members from loyal allies, ensuring that no one could offer guidance or protection. Key servants, either intimidated or manipulated, became unwilling instruments in the sisters' schemes, spreading misinformation, sabotaging essential operations, or even inciting violent disputes among family members. Fear had become a weapon, and the sisters wielded it with surgical precision. Tragedy struck swiftly. The Lemoine family fortune began to unravel, and with it, the family's cohesion. Sons and daughters turned on one another. Disputes over inheritance escalated into public shame, and the family's social connections, once strong and vital, frayed completely. One by one, the household's pillars of stability crumbled, leaving chaos in the sisters' wake. By the time the sisters finally departed, the Lemoines were a hollow shell of their former selves, proud names tarnished, family bonds shattered, and their influence in the region all but erased. The destruction of the Lemoines marked a chilling escalation in the sisters' campaign. What had begun as covert manipulation had grown into total domination, leaving families paralyzed by fear, unable to respond, and trapped by their own internal conflicts. By now, the sisters were no longer merely infamous. They were legendary figures of terror, their reputation spreading quietly but unmistakably across Louisiana. Their cruelty was not random. It followed a deliberate pattern, one that ensured each family they touched would collapse from within, leaving nothing but ruin behind. The fourth and final family to fall victim to the sisters' calculated wrath was the Moreau family, a household with deep roots in Louisiana society and a lineage that had commanded respect for generations. Unlike the previous families, the Moreaus were cautious, proud, and confident in their social standing. They believed that their wealth, connections, and long-established reputation would shield them from the type of ruin that had befallen the Beaumonts, Duvals, and Lemoines. They were tragically mistaken. The sisters approached the Moreaus as if they were harmless, distant relatives seeking employment within the household. Their charm and intelligence masked the deadly intent that simmered beneath the surface. Once inside, the sisters meticulously observed every weakness, every resentment, and every secret that could be exploited. They were patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, understanding that the destruction of a family's lineage required more than fear. It required complete disintegration from within. Once again, the sisters employed the tools they had mastered: whisper campaigns, subtle sabotage, and manipulation of trust. However, with the Moreaus, the cruelty reached unprecedented levels. They began isolating heirs from their mentors, undermining the authority of the patriarch and matriarch, and planting seeds of betrayal among siblings. Disputes over inheritance and business dealings, once minor, escalated into public confrontations that shamed the family in the eyes of their peers. The sisters didn't stop there. They ensured that marriages intended to secure alliances failed, either by convincing spouses of infidelity or by sowing doubt that eroded bonds irreparably. Family members mysteriously fell ill, died prematurely, or vanished under suspicious circumstances, leaving holes in the lineage that could never be repaired. By the time the sisters withdrew, the Moreaus had been stripped of their heirs, their wealth fragmented, and their name permanently tarnished. Every generation that could have carried the family legacy forward was either lost, broken, or irreparably damaged. The obliteration of the Moreau family marked the terrifying apex of the sisters' campaign. 4 families, once pillars of Louisiana society, had been dismantled without a single conventional act of warfare, not by fire, not by sword, but through cunning, manipulation, and psychological terror. The sisters' legend was cemented in local memory as figures capable of annihilating not just individuals, but entire bloodlines, leaving communities haunted by the knowledge that such calculated cruelty could exist within human form. By this point, the sisters were more than infamous. They were myths walking the plantations and backroads of Louisiana, whispered about in fear and awe, their names forever intertwined with destruction, terror, and the complete eradication of family legacies. To understand the terror wrought by the sisters, one must peer into the depths of their psyche, a mind that seemed almost engineered for manipulation and destruction. While history provides few concrete details about their early lives, the patterns of their actions suggest a chilling combination of traits that set them apart from ordinary cruelty. They were methodical, patient, and disturbingly perceptive, capable of reading fear, ambition, and weakness in anyone they encountered. Historians and psychologists examining similar figures describe traits consistent with extreme sociopathy, a lack of empathy, a propensity for manipulation, and an almost surgical calculation in their cruelty. The sisters did not act out of impulsive anger or emotional reaction. Every step they took was measured, designed to maximize psychological damage and ensure the complete destruction of the families they targeted. Their pleasure appeared to come not from physical violence, but from watching social structures crumble, alliances fracture, and legacies vanish. Some accounts suggest that their environment may have shaped these tendencies, born into a rigid and brutal system of slavery and social hierarchies. The sisters were constantly exposed to oppression, inequality, and the suffering of those around them. Rather than cultivating compassion, these conditions may have hardened their hearts, teaching them that power was gained and maintained through fear, manipulation, and dominance. In a world where survival often required cunning, they had honed their abilities to a deadly perfection. Moreover, their repeated targeting of prominent families points to a fascination with control and legacy. They were not indiscriminate in their cruelty. They struck at the pillars of society, dismantling wealth and influence as though erasing entire histories was a form of mastery. This suggests an intellectualized approach to evil, one that combined ambition, strategy, and an almost ritualistic precision in execution. Even local witnesses recognized the unnerving aura of the sisters. Neighbors and surviving family members reported an almost preternatural sense that these women could see through deception, anticipate reactions, and manipulate outcomes with eerie foresight. To those around them, the sisters were not merely cruel, they were uncanny, figures whose presence alone inspired dread, and whose actions seemed orchestrated by a mind beyond ordinary comprehension. In short, the sisters' psychological profile reveals a rare and terrifying blend of intelligence, sociopathy, and strategic malice. They were not driven by mere jealousy, greed, or revenge alone. They were driven by an almost pathological desire to dominate, manipulate, and ultimately annihilate. Understanding this dark core is essential to grasping the full horror of their reign, for it was their minds, not weapons, that made them truly unstoppable. As the sisters' reign of terror spread through Louisiana, it was not just the families they targeted who were affected. Entire communities felt the shadow of their presence, even if the sisters never directly touched every household. Whispers began to circulate along the dusty backroads, in market squares, and in the small chapels where neighbors gathered. Fear became almost tangible, a constant, quiet tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. Locals spoke of strange coincidences surrounding the sisters. Crops failing, livestock falling ill, or sudden misfortunes in otherwise prosperous homes were quietly attributed to their unseen influence. Some claimed to have seen the sisters lurking near their property late at night, their figures almost spectral, vanishing before anyone could confront them. Others swore that the sisters possessed an uncanny ability to predict events, anticipating arguments, disputes, and betrayals before they even occurred. These stories, passed quietly from one neighbor to another, grew with each telling, blending fact and fear into legend. The sisters' notoriety also bred superstition. Some villagers whispered that dark powers were at work, suggesting the sisters were somehow cursed or in league with forces beyond the natural world. It was said that a glance from the sisters could bring misfortune, that their footsteps carried a curse, or that, simply speaking, ill of them invited calamity. Even the bravest of plantation owners hesitated to confront them, fearful not only of exposure, but of the mysterious and often inexplicable disasters that seemed to follow in their wake. Community fear was compounded by silence. Many were reluctant to speak out or challenge the sisters directly, knowing that doing so could result in personal ruin. Servants who might have revealed secrets were either too intimidated or subtly coerced into complicity. Families lived in quiet dread, unsure if their prosperity or peace would survive the sisters' next move. The whispers themselves became a form of power, invisible yet relentless, spreading the sisters' influence far beyond the reach of their physical presence. In essence, the community around the sisters became a stage for their legend. Fear was both their shield and their weapon, as each story of misfortune reinforced their aura of invincibility. By the time their actions were fully understood, the sisters were no longer just criminals in the eyes of those who lived near them. They were figures of mythic terror, their names spoken in hushed tones, the embodiment of dread that could touch anyone, anywhere in Louisiana. One of the darkest and most unsettling aspects of the sisters' rise to infamy was the way they exploited the very communities around them, particularly the enslaved networks that existed on and between Louisiana plantations. These networks, meant for survival and secret communication among enslaved people, became tools that the sisters manipulated to devastating effect. It was a masterstroke of psychological cunning, using fear, loyalty, and deception to turn potential allies into instruments of destruction. The sisters had an uncanny ability to identify vulnerabilities among those who served the targeted families. They would cultivate trust with certain servants or overseers, whispering just enough truth to convince them of the sisters' good intentions, while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt or fear. Once these insiders were under their sway, the sisters could manipulate events with frightening precision. A misplaced document, a misdirected message, or a subtle suggestion could set off a chain reaction that destabilized an entire household from within. Complicity wasn't always voluntary. Many who were caught in the sisters' web acted out of fear for their own safety or survival. Refusal could result in mysterious misfortune, loss of position, or even death, either real or rumored. The sisters understood the psychology of intimidation, exploiting the fact that enslaved workers lived under constant threat and were acutely aware of the consequences of disobedience. Through whispers and innuendo, the sisters created an invisible hierarchy of control that extended far beyond what outsiders could see. These internal networks magnified the sisters' reach. Even families who thought they were vigilant and cautious often found themselves blindsided by betrayals that originated within their own homes. The sisters' ability to orchestrate events through intermediaries made their actions seem supernatural or inexplicable. It also reinforced their legend, as no one could trace the full extent of their manipulations, leaving communities to speculate about curses, dark powers, or simply the terrifying brilliance of the sisters themselves. Ultimately, the sisters' manipulation of slave networks underscores the terrifying reality that their cruelty was not limited to brute force. They wielded influence and fear with the subtlety of a master strategist, turning the tools of survival and communication against who trusted them. In doing so, they ensured that the impact of their terror was amplified, leaving not only destroyed families in their wake, but a community gripped by paranoia, suspicion, and a lingering sense of helplessness. While much of the legend surrounding the sisters is shrouded in rumor and whispered fear, historical records provide chilling confirmation that their acts of destruction were very real. Court documents, estate inventories, and plantation records from 1841, 1842 offer glimpses into the devastation they wrought, providing a rare, sobering window into their methods and the scale of their cruelty. Legal records reveal lawsuits filed by surviving family members, often seeking restitution for ruined estates or disrupted inheritances. The complaints describe mysterious mismanagement, sabotaged crops, and sudden financial losses that decimated wealth built over generations. Witness statements mention the sisters' subtle manipulations, noting that they were never seen to commit harm directly, yet misfortune followed wherever they dwelt. These accounts, painstakingly recorded by lawyers and clerks of the time, corroborate the pattern historians have pieced together. Families were destroyed from within by unseen hands. Plantation records further corroborate the sisters' calculated interference. Ledgers note inexplicable thefts, livestock deaths, and failed shipments, all occurring under the sisters' presence. Servants' notes, sometimes written secretly, hint at fear, coercion, and complicity, revealing how insiders were manipulated to carry out acts that destabilized entire households. Even more striking are letters between neighbors, which describe a growing terror, as if misfortune could be summoned by the sisters simply crossing into a property. Some historians also point to indirect evidence, such as unusual mortality patterns among hares, sudden relocations, and the collapse of long-established family alliances. These patterns, while circumstantial, align precisely with the sisters' documented presence in multiple households, strengthening the historical case for their culpability. Scholars have meticulously cross-referenced these records, establishing that the sisters were not mythic bougie women, but deliberate agents of ruin. Together, these legal documents, letters, and estate records provide a sobering reality. The sisters' reign of terror was not exaggerated legend. It was a tangible series of calculated acts, executed with intelligence and precision, leaving behind irrefutable evidence of psychological, social, and financial devastation. For modern historians, these documents are invaluable, offering proof that the sisters' notoriety was earned through real-world actions so deliberate and meticulous that they left a mark on Louisiana history that could never be erased. The aftermath of the sisters' reign of terror left devastation not only in estates and finances, but also in the lives of the surviving family members. Those who escaped the sisters' direct manipulation were often irrevocably changed, carrying the scars of psychological trauma, broken relationships, and shattered legacies for the rest of their lives. In many cases, survival itself came at a steep cost. Exile, poverty, or complete social isolation became the new reality. For the Beaumonts, the first family to fall, a handful of younger children were removed from the plantation and sent to live with distant relatives in neighboring parishes. These children grew up under the shadow of fear and mistrust, their family name forever tainted by the whispers of ruin that followed the sisters. The Duval heirs faced similar fates. Marriages dissolved under stress, business ventures failed, and the surviving siblings were forced to scatter, leaving behind the lands and homes that once defined their identity. The Lemoine and Moreau families suffered even harsher consequences. Many heirs succumbed to despair, some dying prematurely due to illness exacerbated by stress, while others left Louisiana entirely, unable to rebuild what had been stolen from them. Entire branches of these families' lineages disappeared, a grim testament to the sisters' methodical destruction. In social circles, the surviving members became reclusive or mistrusted, constantly reminded by neighbors and relatives of the family's downfall. Even generations later, the psychological impact lingered. Descendants of these families recounted stories of paranoia, fear of betrayal, and anxiety over inheritance disputes, emotional legacies passed down alongside the material losses. The sisters' influence, though no longer physically present, continued to haunt the families, shaping their decisions and interactions for decades. Remarkably, some survivors attempted to rebuild, but the damage was often irreparable. Estates were sold at a loss, alliances severed, and the social stature the families had once commanded never fully returned. In the end, the sisters achieved their ultimate goal, not only the eradication of wealth and property, but the effective annihilation of entire family legacies. The surviving members lived in a world where the past was a constant reminder of fear, manipulation, and loss, ensuring that the sisters' terror extended far beyond their immediate actions, seeping into the very fabric of Louisiana society. Modern historians who study the events surrounding the Merciless sisters of Louisiana have approached the story with both fascination and caution, seeking to separate fact from legend while acknowledging the undeniable psychological and social impact of their actions. Most agree that the sisters were far more than local criminals. They represented a unique convergence of intelligence, manipulation, and psychological cruelty that allowed them to exploit the vulnerabilities of an entire social system. Scholars note that the sisters' crimes highlight how fear and psychological warfare can be just as devastating as physical violence. Unlike conventional perpetrators of murder or theft, the sisters operated with precision and patience, dismantling families from the inside out. Historians describe them as early examples of calculated sociopathy in a historical context, figures who understood and weaponized human emotion to achieve total domination. Their actions were not chaotic or impulsive. They followed discernible patterns, which allowed them to strike repeatedly without immediate detection or resistance. Many researchers also contextualize the sisters' impact within the broader framework of antebellum Louisiana. The rigid hierarchies, pervasive social inequality, and reliance on enslaved labor created an environment where power could be exercised subtly, and rumors or unseen manipulations could cause enormous harm. The sisters, whether consciously or instinctively, mastered this system, using it to magnify their influence and leave destruction in their wake. This makes their story not only a tale of individual cruelty, but also a cautionary reflection on how social structures can facilitate the rise of destructive forces. Another point historians emphasize is the long-term societal impact. Even decades later, the affected families, diminished wealth and influence reshaped local social networks, creating vacuums of power and leaving communities wary and fragmented. Oral histories and archival documents suggest that the sisters' legend became a cultural touchstone, a narrative warning of cunning, manipulation, and the fragility of social standing. In this sense, the sisters' legacy extends beyond their immediate victims. They became symbols of the invisible forces that can unravel communities quietly, systematically, and with terrifying efficiency. Modern analysis also explores the psychological and gendered dimensions of their notoriety. That two women, in a male-dominated and violent society, could wield such power through intellect and strategy alone challenges common assumptions about gender and influence in antebellum Louisiana. Historians argue that this dimension of the sisters' story adds depth, illustrating how intellect and psychological mastery can rival physical dominance in creating fear and destruction. Ultimately, historians view the sisters as more than mere figures of folklore. They are case studies in manipulation, social engineering, and the devastating effects of unchecked psychological cruelty. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that terror is not always delivered with weapons. Sometimes it is executed quietly, methodically, and invisibly, leaving wounds that persist through generations. The legacy of the Merciless sisters continues to echo through Louisiana history, centuries after their reign of psychological and social destruction. Though the sisters themselves disappeared from records, the families they annihilated left a permanent scar on the cultural memory of the region. In towns, plantations, and parish records, whispers of their cruelty persisted, passed down from generation to generation as cautionary tales of fear, manipulation, and human malice. The most striking aspect of their legacy is how it transformed local society. Families once prominent were permanently weakened, leaving power vacuums that reshaped social hierarchies. Estates that might have remained intact for generations were sold or abandoned, Wealth that could have supported entire communities dissipated, and alliances that once held families together were forever fractured. Descendants grew up with the burden of ruined names, haunted not only by material loss, but also by the psychological imprint of their ancestors' torment. The sisters' story also became an enduring part of Louisiana folklore. Oral histories, retellings, and even local legends spoke of the women who could destroy with a glance, their names synonymous with invisible terror. Plantation workers, neighbors, and community elders would recount encounters, mysterious misfortunes, or sudden deaths tied to the sisters' presence. Whether factual or embellished, these stories reinforced the aura of fear surrounding them. In many ways, the sisters became a symbol of how intelligence and manipulation could rival brute strength, a figure of caution for generations who lived in the shadow of their reputation. Historians studying Louisiana's antebellum period often cite the sisters as an example of the unseen psychological forces that shaped communities. Unlike wars, natural disasters, or overt crime, their method of destruction was quiet, insidious, and personal, leaving a form of terror that lingered far longer than the actual events. In academic circles, their story is referenced to demonstrate the power of fear, social influence, and manipulation, and the vulnerability of even wealthy or powerful families to internal decay. Even today, tours, ghost stories, and historical retrospectives invoke the sisters' tale as a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and cunning cruelty. Their legacy is a reminder that history is not only made by battles fought openly, but also by the invisible hands of those who manipulate, deceive, and destroy from the shadows. In the hearts of Louisiana's descendants and in the cultural memory of its communities, the sisters' shadow endures, a chilling echo of terror that began in 1841 but has never truly faded.